Hey, this is Richard with a trip report on Delta's nonstop service between Atlanta, Georgia and Venice, Italy in the Delta One cabin of the Boeing 767. I found out about this route a few months before my trip, and then I started tracking the fares on the Delta website. Eventually, I locked in a round-trip fare of $4,200 with a Thursday departure and a return on a Tuesday a couple of weeks later. This fare was comparable to the one I got last year for a business class seat from Chicago to Rome on American's Boeing 777. Our outbound flight from Atlanta was Flight 192 with an 8:15 p.m. departure and a scheduled arrival in Venice at 11:40 the next morning. Flying time was just over 9 hours. We flew into Atlanta from Albuquerque with only a 2-hour layover, but we still made it in plenty of time to check out the Delta Sky Club in Terminal E. Delta One passengers have access to these lounges. I'll have more to say on these sky clubs later, but my primary impressions of the one at Terminal E was that it was busy and cramped. Our flight boarded at gate E36, a pretty chill space at the end of Terminal E. We boarded on time, entering behind the first-class cabin and then taking a left up to our seats 2D and 3D on the right side of the aircraft. The cabin has a 1-2-1 configuration, and a lot of couples like the middle 2 seats, but my wife and I both prefer window seats, so we like to sit back-to-back on the window side. These seats are ideal because you're among the first to get food and beverage service, but you're still set back a little bit from the noise of the galley. Another plus is that seat 4D is reserved for pilots taking a rest. It has a curtain around it, so it feels like no one is sitting behind you. The seats are narrow, thinly cushioned, and set into a rectangular shell. There's a small table that's either on the window or the aisle side, depending on where you sit. For instance, in 3D it was on the window, in 2D it was on the aisle. Having sat in both, I give a slight advantage to the configuration with the table on the aisle side, as it gives you a little more of a sense of space. The window and middle seats are staggered so that there is no one right across from you, further enhancing your sense of privacy. The seat has a small storage area where they stash the headphones and a bottle of water before the flight. There are a few power outlets and a remote control in the arm of the seat that is very useful for manipulating a video screen that is out of arm's reach when you recline your seat. On each seat was a zip-up bag containing a pillow and comforter. Slippers are also provided, but they were too small for my size 11 feet. We were settling in when the pilot went on the PA and told us that one of the flight crew had misplaced or forgotten his passport, and that we couldn't leave until that passport was recovered. This resulted in a 1-hour delay. Finally, they brought in a relief pilot, and the pilot who had forgotten his passport had to do the walk of shame down the aisle and out the doors. If there was one silver lining to this delay, it put us in Venice closer to the check-in time for our hotel. By the time we pushed from the gate, it was dark outside. We took off and climbed to the northeast. The flight path carried us over New England and Canada before crossing above the open water of the North Atlantic. Meal service began shortly after we reached cruising altitude. After the perfunctory warm nuts, an appetizer plate arrived featuring cold poached shrimp with remoulade, a sauce similar to mayonnaise, and a roasted cauliflower and garlic soup with kale pesto. Both were terrific. I had pre-ordered the chicken leg with potatoes and a lemon herb sauce. It sounded better than it was. The skin was rubbery, the sauce bland. Other choices were tortellini and short rib. My wife, who has celiac disease, had meatballs. I tried a glass of the Spanish white wine. It was good and crisp, like biting into a Granny Smith apple. I had read on the Delta website that there was a dessert cart that the flight attendants would wheel down the aisle and make sundaes right at your seat side. Unfortunately, that dessert cart never materialized. Instead, the sundaes were delivered to us pre-made. They consisted of vanilla ice cream with chocolate sauce, cherry compote, and cookie crumble. I like ice cream, but I thought this vanilla was middling, and the chocolate sauce was not heated. Other options were a chocolate cake and a fruit and cheese plate. The amenity kit comes in a fabric purse with the name of the artisan stitched on it. For me, the most useful components were the wooden toothbrush and mini tube of toothpaste. I used them with the provided bottle of water to brush my teeth. I was hoping to get some sleep and speed the setting of my internal clock to Venice time. The seat controls work through a couple of screens. You can adjust individual components or choose from 4 settings. The lie flat mode delivered as advertised. I'm 6'1" and I found that I had several inches of clearance and my feet fit comfortably into the footwell. If you're going to lie on your back, I would recommend using the blanket for knee support. According to my watch, I did manage to sleep about 3 hours. After the long stretch over the North Atlantic, we skirted the British Isles and then flew in over continental Europe. By then it was time for breakfast. My choice was a red pepper frittata with chicken sausage, potatoes, and wilted spinach. The frittata was good and fluffy, the sausage a bit dense and dry. There was also a Greek yogurt and granola option. In Venice, we deplaned from the front doors just behind the cockpit. The trip through passport control was a breeze, and then we got our bags from a fairly cramped baggage area. We then made the long walk, much of it on moving sidewalks, to the water taxi area. A private water taxi from Marco Polo Airport into the city cost €140. That's a big splurge, but as first-time visitors to the city, we wanted to have a memorable and hassle-free introduction to Venice, and the private water taxi certainly delivered on that. The Alle Laguna water bus costs only a fraction of the private taxi rate, but it takes longer and it can be quite crowded, and you may have to transfer to another water taxi to get near your hotel. There were also land transportation options that take you over the causeway to Piazzale Roma, a square adjacent to the train station, where you would then grab water transportation toward your lodging. Our return flight took place 2 weeks later on Flight 193, a 767-400 with an 11:05 departure and a scheduled arrival in Atlanta of 4:05 in the afternoon for a flying time of 10 hours and change. We returned to Venice the night before on the train from Florence and stayed at the Courtyard Marriott near the airport. I was very pleased with this hotel. It's nothing fancy, but the rooms are clean and there's a restaurant in the lobby. We arrived at check-in at Marco Polo Airport a few minutes after 8, only to discover that the check-in counters weren't open yet. So we waited with the other passengers behind a barrier. After about 10 minutes, they let us through. There is a dedicated line for Delta One passengers. Check-in was easy, the people were friendly, and we were quickly passed through to the duty-free shops. There's a Venchi chocolate outlet and a store that sells Murano glass if you're looking to get rid of any euros you might still have. We headed up to the Marco Polo Lounge to get some food and drinks. Delta One passengers have access to this lounge. It's on the second floor near the escalators. The lounge has an assortment of rooms. Most of the people were concentrated in a big room next to the food station. There were no self-serve options for coffee and juice. Instead, you have to wait in a line. I had a couple of yogurts and a ham roll with my OJ and cappuccino. Food choices are very limited for gluten-free diners. Just before 10, we headed down to a gate area that was pretty cramped, but there was an empty room in the back corner. Once again, we were in seats 2D and 3D, only this time I had 2D and my wife took 3D. The flight follows the same pathway over Europe and the North Atlantic as the outbound, but it takes an hour longer because of the jet stream. We took off to the south and then banked to the north, affording those of us on the right side of the plane one last view of Venice and the lagoon. The Alps came up pretty quickly, then meal service commenced. The potato and leek soup was very good, hot, thick, well seasoned, and poured at your seat so that the croutons didn't get soggy. I'm not a fan of salmon, so the citrus marinated appetizer went largely untouched. This time I didn't pre-order a meal. I chose the spinach and ricotta ravioli and cheese sauce from the regular menu. It was quite good. The sauce and filling were light, the pasta still had some teeth on it. Other options were the short rib and a chicken breast with ham. My wife enjoyed her gluten-free chicken dish. I was happy to see the dessert cart make an appearance on this flight. I wanted something different, so I chose the pistachio panna cotta with cocoa crumble. It's a lighter option, subtly flavored with some crunch from the crumble. Very good. A half hour or so later, we got a fat, warm chocolate chip cookie that was excellent. Unfortunately, there was no gluten-free equivalent for my wife. I didn't drink alcohol or sleep on this flight as I was trying to get back onto U.S. time. Fortunately, there were plenty of movies available. I watched 4. It helped break the 10-hour flight up into more manageable chunks. After a long stretch over the water, we entered the airspace over northeastern Canada. There were some compelling views of the New Brunswick coastline before the clouds closed in. About 2 hours out of Atlanta, I started getting very hungry, so I was happy to see the lunch service begin. I had the tomato basil pizza. The diamond-shaped pie was cheesy and doughy. It was served with olives, fruit salad, and a couple of cream puffs. A very satisfying afternoon snack that kept me full for the next several hours. The other option was a plate of cold cuts and cheese with fruit. My wife had a gluten-free chicken salad. She was quite happy with it. We landed on time in Atlanta and deplaned behind the first-class cabin. Customs was a breeze. Lots of people went to the global entry machines, so there was no line at the regular customs booths. After that, it was on to baggage claim. As you may know, all bags from international flights to the U.S. are offloaded at their first U.S. stop. This means that if you have a connecting flight, you have to get your bags at this baggage claim and then take them to an adjacent area where they are quickly rechecked to your final destination. This all went smoothly, and then we were expelled out into a busy Atlanta airport for a long layover before our flight to Albuquerque. This allowed us to do a mini tour of the Delta Sky Clubs. There are several detailed reviews of these lounges online. I'll just add that the staff was friendly and welcoming across all the locations, but the spaces were just too small for the amount of people using them. Overall, though, my experience in the Delta One cabin exceeded my expectations. I had thought it would be a step down from the American Airlines business class and the 777 for the simple reason that 767 is a smaller aircraft. But what I hadn't taken into account was the different orientations of the seats. In the American plane, the seats are angled toward the window, but in the Delta One cabin, they're lined up straight along the window. So really, it felt just as spacious to me in the 67. I didn't really notice a difference in the cabin size. As for grades, I would give the food a B. There were hits and misses, but something to enjoy in every course. Service gets a B+ thanks to a couple of friendly flight attendants. There was that 1 hour delay on departure, but it went by quickly sitting up in the front of the plane. The seat gets a B-. It's narrow, there's not a lot of cushioning, but the controls worked, and the footwell was bigger than the one on the American Airlines plane. I'd also give the value a B-. At the time I bought the ticket, I thought $4,200 was a lot to spend for a round trip to Europe, but I've been tracking these fares recently, and I think I got a pretty good price. If you see something for less than $5,000 round trip, then I would strongly consider getting it. If it's less than $4,000, I would definitely jump on it. Hope this helps. Thanks for watching.